Okay. Good evening, Mr. Evan Krause, faculty, staff, family, and friends, and members of the Martin Luther King Jr. Scholars Program. My name is Maria Smith, and as they said, I am a senior studying social work and African American studies and a proud MLK scholar. It is a sincere honor and privilege to be here with you all tonight as we celebrate and remember a man and his legacy of fighting against injustice, racism, and inequality. While all of us here today are indeed privileged to live in a world influenced by Dr. King and the many, many others that have worked tirelessly before us, we still have a lot of work left to do. Growing up in Prince George's County, Maryland, in first grade, I felt privileged to be able to attend Tamisha Bascom's bowling birthday party. Because of Dr. King's legacy, I was able to learn alongside her and many other peers who were African American, as well as Peruvian, Filipino, Jamaican, Salvadorian, Nigerian, and Indian, to name a few. In middle school, I felt privileged to not be stereotyped as a terrorist because of my religion. And unlike the many Muslim women who were looked down upon and seen as oppressed for wearing their hijabs, I felt privileged to not have to worry about defending the Catholic nuns in my faith who chose to cover themselves. In high school, I felt privileged to be able to decide who to sit with in the lunchroom and not be labeled as retarded, gay, or ghetto, like many of those I had the opportunity to sit with had been. My first year here at SLU, I felt privileged to not have a cross that symbolized my identity as a member of the LGBT community vandalized on campus. I felt privileged to not have the N-word be written outside my door on a floor that I was the residential assistant for. I felt privileged to not fear being stereotyped as a criminal because I matched the descriptions emailed in the public safety reports. A black male in his early 20s between 5'5" and 6 foot wearing a hoodie. And I felt privileged to not be one of the multiple African American females on this campus who were harassed and targeted by members of their residential hall floors. I felt especially privileged to not have a fellow student call me the N-word and threaten to lynch me. My sophomore year, it was a privilege to be a part of Dr. Bradley's Intro to African American Studies class, where we learned about the history of almost 10 million enslaved people that made it to the New World between 1500 and 1860. Following that class, I had the opportunity to partake in a 2-week immersion trip to Ghana and tour the largest and oldest existing castle connected to the transatlantic slave trade. As I peered through the door of no return, walked through the male and female dungeons, looked out into the Atlantic Ocean, remembering the other 20 million enslaved people who would not survive the journey aboard the slave ships, I was reminded that it was a privilege that my Czech and Irish ancestors did not have to suffer through the horrors of slavery, nor when it ended, have to constantly combat the racist structures set in place to disenfranchise and suppress my people's dignity and freedom. Though my ancestors came to this country, they came freely and in pursuit of a better life. During the fall of my junior year, I had the privilege to study abroad in El Salvador through the Casa de la Solidaridad program, or House of Solidarity. I heard Rufina Amaya's daughter share her mother was the only person who survived a massacre of over 1,000 innocent campesinos, or poor farmers, by the US-funded Salvadorian army. It was a privilege to spend 2 days a week learning about the harsh realities of poverty from Daisy Sañez Portillo and her family that lived in a small rural community near Tepecoyo, El Salvador. Throughout that experience, I felt privileged to not have had to fight to survive through poverty and a violent civil war, nor have my voice be silenced as a person of color in a developing country. I felt privileged to be a United States citizen. Coming back to SLU, I saw the connection between the children in El Salvador and the children I had gotten to know through volunteering at an after-school program in North City. They too had been fighting to survive through poverty and surrounded by a violent war that includes infant mortality rates comparable to that of El Salvador, poorly resourced schools, lack of access to nutritional meals, surrounded by gang violence and drug abuse, and often also silenced as people of color within our society. They too have been harmfully impacted by the institutional racism that continues to exist. And as was made evident when a 5-year-old African-American boy I was helping with homework asked me, "Miss Maria, why are white people smarter than black people?" I learned about the state of contemporary Black America in Dr. Thompson's class, read and seen how far we'd come at the Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, and walked up the steps of the Little Rock High School with members of the Black Student Alliance this past fall. But in seeing the reality of life for people living just a couple blocks down the street from our university, and even more closely in working at the social work internship with women in the YWCA's transitional housing program located on our campus, I cannot help but recognize the enormous need for us as women and men for others, and as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. scholars, to educate ourselves and continue to strive to work and advance Dr. King's legacy in the world around us. As Spider-Man, Voltaire, and a fellow MLK scholar have all once said, "With great power comes great responsibility." Similarly, with privilege comes accountability and an obligation to continue working to educate myself and promote the freedom and justice for all people that has not yet been achieved in this country. In the coming years, I have quite a bit of debt to pay. I'll be paying my student loans back to SLU, but I will also be paying back all of the individuals who have taught me, loved me, and challenged me to do more and to be more. Fighting for the ideals of justice and equality will not always be easy. In fact, if they ever do seem easy, we probably are not trying hard enough. But as Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there is no progress. It has been an honor and a privilege to be a member of the MLK Scholar Program and see my fellow 2012 scholars overcome countless obstacles and become active members in promoting social change on campus and in our surrounding community. I have faith you will all continue to pursue your passions and strive in your own ways to enact change wherever the next step may take you. You can't stop, won't stop now. You've come too far. We've come too far. Thank you all for encouraging me, teaching me, and most importantly, thank you for challenging me. I owe you one, but as I said, I will try to pay it forward and continue to identify with those who do not have the same privileges as I, in hopes of working towards a world where one day they will. I would also like to take this opportunity to speak to my fellow freshmen, sophomore, and junior MLK scholars. As seniors preparing to graduate this coming May, it is our senior privilege and responsibility to challenge you all to do more, to be more, to show up and show out. You all have an extremely important role and obligation here at SLU. I hope you support each other, encourage each other, and most importantly, challenge yourselves and each other to grow. Claim your privileges and your struggles. Make a difference with the power that you hold. The world needs you, SLU needs you, and the marginalized, silenced, and oppressed groups of people that Dr. King died fighting for need you. Soak up the opportunity to take African American Studies classes if you can. Learn about our nation's past. Be involved in the present by engaging with our neighboring communities. As was mentioned earlier, during a speech delivered in 1968 entitled, "Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution," Dr. King stated, "We must all learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." As we are reminded of the great privilege of standing upon the shoulders of Dr. King and the countless others who have fought, I hope that we continue to work towards becoming what we ought to be. May we continue to grow to improve opportunities for passionate students to attend SLU, whose race, ethnicity, class, religion, and sexual orientation are underrepresented and who are dedicated to living out Dr. King's legacy. A special thank you to all those who have made this day and program possible, to the tireless work of Ms. LaTanya Buck, Ms. Ashley Gray, and the entire MLK Steering Committee. Thank you to the Chartwell staff and the maintenance staff for setting up and running this event. Thank you to my fellow King Scholar Student Committee members, and thank you all for listening. And lastly, I would like to thank Dr. King. Dear Dr. King, I am a senior student at St. Louis University. While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white woman. I've read books, watched movies, and learned of your triumphs, misfortunes, and of your sufferings. And I've read that if you had not lived, much of the world may have stayed the same. And I'm simply writing to say that I am so happy that you did live. It has been a privilege to be able to learn from your legacy. And you were right. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, we would like for you to have lived a long life. But as you said, longevity has its place. We know God's will allowed you to go to the mountaintop, and you're looking over, and you've seen the promised land. You may not be here with us, but we want you to know tonight that we as a people will continue to work to get to the promised land. Thank you.